I was 21 when this happened. Back then, I was living in a small two-story rental house in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a narrow hallway, and a staircase that creaked no matter how carefully you walked. I lived with 2 roommates, but during Thanksgiving break, both of them went home. That left me alone in the house for 4 days. I didn't think much of it at first, until the second night showed me how wrong I was. The first night was peaceful, nothing unusual. I watched a movie, ate leftovers, and went to sleep around midnight. But the second night, that was when the house felt different. Around 11:30, I was downstairs in the small office room. It sat directly below the upstairs hallway, so anytime someone walked across the second floor, I could hear it clearly. I was finishing some work when I heard movement upstairs. Slow, measured, deliberate. I froze. Nobody else was supposed to be home. For the first few seconds, I tried to rationalize it. Old house, pipes, maybe the wind pushing against the siding. But this wasn't that. These were footsteps, constant, steady, and unmistakably human. I turned off my monitor and listened. The steps traveled from one end of the hallway to the other. Not fast, not hesitant, just a slow pace, like someone inspecting each doorway. I stood up and grabbed the small metal bar we kept near the office door for emergencies. My heart was pounding, but I tried not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped. I walked quietly to the bottom of the staircase and listened again. Nothing, just silence. I turned on the staircase light. The glow spilled across the steps, but didn't reveal anything. Upstairs was still pitch dark. Part of me wanted to call the police, but another part of me wondered if I was overtired, imagining things after a long week. So I forced myself to walk up. One step at a time. Every stair creaked. Every breath felt loud. When I reached the top, I checked every room. Mine, my roommates, the bathroom. Everything was empty. Everything looked untouched. Still, something felt wrong. Like the air upstairs was thicker, colder. I kept the hallway light on and went back downstairs, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But an hour later, the footsteps returned. Exactly the same pace, exactly the same route, just steady movement up and down the hallway above me. Except this time, the lights were already on upstairs, so it couldn't be a trick of shadows or imagination. My mouth felt dry as I whispered to myself, "You checked everything. Nobody's up there." But the footsteps continued, calm, unbothered, as if whoever or whatever was up there knew I wouldn't come back. I didn't go upstairs again. Instead, I sat completely still in the office chair, just listening. The pacing eventually stopped near the top of the stairs. Then there was nothing for almost a full minute. That silence felt unnatural, intentional. Then I heard something else. Breathing. Deep, slow, controlled. Coming from the top of the staircase. I stared at the dark outline of the hallway, unable to move. It sounded like someone was standing just out of view, waiting. I picked up my phone and quietly dialed my roommate, whispering into the receiver as it rang. Before he could answer, the breathing stopped. Cut off instantly, like someone realized I was listening. That moment of sudden silence made my skin crawl. I grabbed my keys, left the house, locked the door behind me as quietly as I could, and sat in my car for the rest of the night with the engine off. I barely slept. The next morning, I called a friend and asked him to come over so we could check the house together. We walked through every room. Everything looked normal, except for one detail in my roommate's room. The laundry basket wasn't in the same place. It had been moved, just a few inches, enough to make it obvious something touched it. And behind the basket, in the part of the carpet where dust always collected, there was a faint outline. A knee print, like someone had been crouching there, not hiding, but listening. Before we left the room, my friend pointed out something I hadn't noticed. The small attic access door in the ceiling, the one none of us ever used, was slightly open. Not much, just an inch, like someone had pushed it from the inside or pulled it down without fully closing it. I stood under it, staring. The air from the attic felt cold. We ended up closing it and placing a chair under it so we'd notice if it moved again. It never did. But I didn't stay in that house alone again. Even now, I still wonder, were those footsteps from an actual person hiding somewhere in the walls? Or was it something else walking through that hallway? Something that didn't care if the lights were on? I never found out, and honestly, I don't want to. I was 17 when this happened. My parents were out overnight and I had the house to myself. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in northern Utah, the kind of place where people leave garage doors open by accident and nothing ever goes missing. That night changed the way I see our backyard forever. Around 9 in the evening, I stepped outside to take the trash out. The air was cold and I could see my breath drifting in front of me. Our backyard had a tall wooden fence, old in some places, newer in others. A few boards had thin gaps between them. As I bent down to tie the trash bag, something caught my eye. A pale shape through one of the fence gaps. I thought it was light hitting the wood wrong, but when I leaned closer, it sharpened into something unmistakable. An eye. Someone's actual eye, staring straight through the gap at me. No blink, no shift, just a steady, unbroken stare. I backed toward the door, trying not to let my breathing speed up. The second I got inside, I locked the door and checked the windows. Everything was normal. No shadows, no movement. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor checking on something. But the fence backed up to a narrow service alley that nobody used. An hour later, while watching TV, I glanced at the sliding glass door. That's when I saw someone standing at the far end of the yard. They weren't close, they weren't moving, just standing in the dim patch of porch light, body angled toward the house. I couldn't see their face, but their head was tilted slightly, like they were listening. I stepped back into the hallway, staying out of sight. My mind kept cycling through possibilities. Neighbor, trespasser, prank. But something about the stillness wasn't normal. Most people shift their weight, move their hands, look around. This figure didn't. I went upstairs to get a clearer view from my bedroom window. When I looked down, the yard was empty. No footsteps, no sound, no sign of anyone walking away. It was as if the person had simply vanished. That bothered me more than seeing them. I turned off every light in the house so they couldn't see inside. I sat on the couch, listening to the quiet. Around 1:30, I heard a sound outside. Not a loud noise, more like wood dragging lightly against something. A long, slow scrape along the fence. I didn't move, I just listened. Then my phone vibrated. Motion detected, backyard camera. I opened the feed slowly. A person was standing directly in front of the camera, so close their face almost filled the frame. They stared upward at the lens, motionless. Their expression was blank, almost too blank, like they weren't fully aware of what they were doing. But there was something else. In the reflection of the camera glass, behind them, I saw faint movement. Not a person, more like a shifting shadow.
something tall that moved away the second the camera light activated. The recording ended after 30 seconds. I called 911 immediately, then went upstairs and locked my bedroom door. While I waited for the officers, I heard slow steps on the grass, unhurried, as if the person was walking a slow circle around the yard. Then silence. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the alley behind the fence. No one was there. But they found something along the back fence line. Several boards had fresh scrape marks, long, vertical ones, like someone had been pressing their head against the wood and dragging along as they shifted to follow my position inside the house. The officer asked me, "Did you see anyone earlier tonight?" I told him everything. He nodded slowly, then said something that made my stomach drop. A neighbor told us last week they saw someone walking through this alley late at night, didn't recognize them, just standing near fences, listening. I asked if that meant the person came back. The officer didn't answer. He just told me to keep the doors locked and avoid going outside alone for a while. After they left, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Near the fence, just inches from the gap where I'd first seen the eye, the dirt had a faint, partial footprint, barefoot, too large to be a kid's, and facing toward the house. I didn't sleep at all that night. For the next several weeks, every time I took the trash out, I checked every fence gap before walking into the yard. Even now, years later, I still feel like someone was out there longer than we realized, watching, listening, waiting for something. I never found out who the person was, and I still don't know what I saw reflected behind them in the camera lens. But sometimes, when I'm home alone at night, I catch myself glancing toward the backyard fence, just to make sure no one's looking back. This happened 2 years ago when I was living alone in a small rental house just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. The place sat at the edge of a wooded slope, quiet enough that you could hear the winter wind move through the pine trees. It was peaceful until one night in February changed how I looked at that house forever. It was a little after midnight. I was in my living room reading, the kind of tired reading where you're aware of every small sound in the house. That's when I heard something outside. It wasn't knocking, and it wasn't footsteps. It was a faint shift in the gravel on the walkway leading to my porch. Just one small movement, like someone putting their weight down carefully. I looked toward the front door. The porch light was on, but the glass panels in the door were frosted and distorted. I couldn't see much from where I stood. I turned off the living room lamp so I wouldn't be backlit and walked slowly toward the door. And when I got close enough, I saw a shape. Someone was standing on my porch, still, facing the door. They weren't knocking, and they weren't calling out. They were just standing there, as if they'd been there a long time. I stepped back and waited. Nothing happened. No movement, no sound. I finally whispered, "Can I help you?" There was no response. I crouched slowly so I could look through the lower frosted window. The figure didn't react, didn't shift, didn't turn their head, just stood there like they were listening. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, the person leaned forward slightly, only an inch or two, almost pressing closer to the door, then straightened again. I backed away, this time moving into the kitchen where I still had a partial view of the entryway. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The figure never moved once, not even a subtle shift of weight. At that point, I finally called the non-emergency police line and whispered what was happening. They told me officers were on their way. While I waited, something strange happened. The porch light flickered. Just once, almost like someone had passed in front of the sensor, but the figure hadn't moved. I kept staring at the door, and even though the house was warm, I felt a cold draft move across the floor, like the air in the room had shifted. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. A few minutes later, I heard the distant sound of sirens approaching, and that's when the figure finally stepped back. Not startled, not hurried, just calm. They turned toward the side of the house where the trees were thickest and walked into them, slow, deliberate, like they knew the layout better than I did. Within seconds, they were gone. The officers arrived shortly after. They searched the property, the tree line, even the road. They didn't find anyone. But something else happened that I didn't expect. One of the officers walked onto my porch and crouched near the door, shining his flashlight at the ground. Then he looked up at me and asked me, "Did you have a package delivered today?" I told him yes, a medium-sized box, nothing important. He nodded and said quietly, "Someone cut the bottom out of it." I stepped outside and saw it. The box was still neatly placed where the delivery driver had left it, but the entire underside had been sliced open and emptied. Only the shell remained. The officer looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Whoever was out here wasn't waiting for you to answer the door. They were waiting to see if you'd walk outside." They took a statement and eventually left, but the house felt different after that. It felt watched. Over the next week, a few things happened that I still can't explain. One morning, I found faint footprints in the thin frost near the tree line. Only a few, but they led directly toward my house, not away from it. Another night, around the same time, just past midnight, the porch light flickered again. But when I checked the door, no one was there. And twice, I woke up to the sense that something had been near the windows. Not a sound, just the feeling of it, like someone standing outside in the cold darkness, listening. I moved out of that house 3 months later, not because of the package or the person who stood at my door, but because the quiet I once enjoyed never felt the same again. Even now, when I think about that night, the detail that unsettles me most is how the figure never tried to knock, never tried to speak, never even moved until the sirens got close. It was as if they knew exactly what they wanted. And whatever that was, I'm glad they didn't get the chance to find out.